everyone. Good evening. Hope you all had a great day, and thanks for joining us. If you're in Michigan, I hope you're staying warm with all the snow. So my name is Sammy, and I'll be doing the brief introduction of food literacy for all today. This year's theme is Planted in History, a Food Future Informed by the Past. And tonight's session is on There's Power in a Union. We'll be hearing from four wonderful panelists: Laura MacIntyre of ROC United, Laura Nadal, community organizer, Celize Christy with Heal Food Alliance, and Hannah Whitbeck of Starbucks Workers United. So before we get started, I want to point out that Food Literacy for All is co-led by Dr. Margot Finn of LSA and Dr. Shakira Tyler of the School for Environment and Sustainability. Some other team members that make this course possible include our two graduate student instructors, Megan Gross and Nayatsi Hernandez, as well as our Sustainable Food Systems Initiative Coordinator, Kimmy Vandewedge, and our wonderful LSA technology team member, Chris Taylor. Food Literacy for All is presented by the University of Michigan Sustainable Food Systems Initiative, and we want to give a huge thank you to the School for Environment and Sustainability, the Center for the Education of Women Plus, CEW Plus, as well as the CEW Plus Francis and Sydney Lewis Visiting Leaders Fund. So thank you for the support. And there's many ways to engage with Food Literacy for All, so you can join us on Twitter or X. We also have poll questions throughout the session, and all of our classes are filmed and available on the SFSI website. So next we'll move on into the reading response. So this reading response is from Juliet Kay, and the reading response was on a podcast, mostly talking about Heal Food Alliance, and it was the Checkout podcast titled Organizing for Justice in Food. So we'll listen in on Juliet.
In the podcast for this week, Jose mainly focuses on food sovereignty and land reform. He first says the intention of land reform in Guatemala is to get equity and gain reparations for 400 years of slavery and ensure that indigenous people have their own land. He then brings up the term food sovereignty, which is people who need food should have it in a way that's culturally appropriate and it has no exploitation to the land itself or the people that is involved. Both food sovereignty and land reform have an intersectional relationship where land reform builds a foundation that allows food sovereignty to happen. He goes on to say present-day political education for all actors involved is important through a shared understanding of the history of the land. He ends with a personal story of his early stages of activism with the Food Chain Workers Alliance and how the food sector affected people's physical and mental health and how the current food sector draws parallels to plantation slavery.
All right, thank you. And now I'll pass it on to Dr. Shakira Tyler for our introductions.
Thank you, Sammy. Greetings, peace, everyone. So I have the pleasure of introducing all of our panelists, which I'm so excited to do. First, we have Laura MacIntyre, who is a native of Flint, Michigan, where she currently resides with her family. With two Flint public school teachers as parents, Laura was raised in the labor movement tradition and was on the picket lines even before she could walk. After graduating from Smith College and earning graduate degrees in sociology from the University of California, San Diego, Laura continued to participate in various movements for the next 3 decades, including Occupy Wall Street, Strike Debit, and as a water warrior in the Flint water crisis. Laura is a lecturer of sociology at the University of Michigan, Flint, and a full-time organizer for the Restaurant Opportunity Center, Michigan, where she empowers restaurant and other food service workers by providing free training, workshops, and solidarity with other groups and organizations. She has been a member of the Flint Democracy Defense League for over 10 years and is serving a 6-year term as a trustee for the Flint Board of Education. Welcome, Laura. Moving on to the next one. Now we have Laura Nadal, who was born and raised in Puerto Rico and is passionate about history, education, and community organizing. From a young age, Laura volunteered for diverse nonprofit organizations, including Just World International, Fundación Stefano Steenbeckers Betancourt, and the Golden Shoes Project. In 2018, she fundraised to assist fellow Puerto Ricans affected by Hurricane Maria. She became passionate in supporting migrant and low-paid women as a tenant advocate in Cincinnati, Ohio. Laura leveraged her cultural background and Spanish language skills to help Hispanic immigrants secure affordable, safe housing. She is also experienced in developing youth educational programs for history museums. Most recently, Laura assisted in the development of the Humans Who Feed Us campaign while working with Justice for Migrant Women, as well as led the Essential Ohio Coalition. Laura also holds a Bachelor of Arts in History from Cornell University. Thank you for joining us, Laura. Next is Celize Christy at Heal Food Alliance. Celize Christy is an active connector and serves as a bridge connecting Heal members to campaigns, programs, and the Alliance's greater network. Celize comes to Heal's campaign and policy work by way of coordinating farmer-led education programming, advocating for BIPOC farmers in Iowa, and coalition building and organizing in sustainable agricultural organizations. Celize earned her BS in Animal Science and Global Resource Systems with a minor in Spanish from Iowa State University and a master's in Rural Sociology and International Agricultural Development from the Pennsylvania State University. Celize roots her advocacy efforts around the stories, voices, and experiences of both urban and rural farmers of the Midwest. She currently lives in Dallas on occupied Humanos Kickapoo, Tawakoni, and Wichita land, and enjoys exploring local businesses, shops, drinking ginger tea, and playing with her miniature pincher pup, Luce. And last, and of course not least, we have Hannah Whitbeck, who was born and raised in Michigan. She grew up surrounded by union family members and aspiring business owners. After starting a union movement at a local Ann Arbor Starbucks in 2022, Hannah was illegally fired from her supervisor position. Despite her firing, she has been an outspoken union advocate and is proceeding to fight the company against her blatant union busting campaign. She has been described by an NLRB employee as the face of the Michigan campaign and is still currently fighting the company against her illegal termination. Welcome to all of our panelists, and we're looking forward to getting in.
Sorry for my slowness there. I was having trouble getting to the unmute button behind the iClicker poll window, which leads me to our next. Before I turn to our panelists, I have just a couple of questions for everybody here, for students and for audience members. If you want to drop your answer in the chat, feel free. Our first one is just, have you ever worked in any part of the food industry? So on a farm, at a grocery store, in a restaurant and cafeteria. I will start the poll now. So answer A, and it's going to send people who are registered in the class a picture of the screen right now. So hopefully this will work this week. We've been working on it. So you should see this on your mobile device if you're using it. And we've got about 45 seconds for people to answer, just to get a sense of how many people here have ever worked in the food industry. We've done this poll in the past in versions of this class, and it's usually over half, which makes sense, of course, because the food industry is, as you all heard, one of our largest sectors of the economy. And there's just a lot of people working to make all of this food that we eat and that we enjoy. Let me see if I can see the chat and see what's going on. A lot of A's. I'm seeing a lot of A's, a few B's as well. Of course, not everybody has worked in the food industry. I am seeing a mix. It'll be interesting to see and we should be able to see the results here. Again, slightly over 50%. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but 61% of people who answered the poll question have worked in the food industry and 39% have not. And we have one more. So let's see if I can forward my screens. Nope, I went too far. Our second poll question is, have you ever been a member of a union? That should show the results of the first one. So let me see if I can start. This should be a second poll now. Yes, here we go. 45 seconds on this one. Are you now or have you ever been a member of a union? As some of you know, I am a union member. I'm a member of the Lecturer Employees Organization, which one of our panelists is also, I believe, a member of LEO. And our graduate student instructors are also unionized and part of GEO. So not just in the food industry, of course, there's a lot of unions, but wondering whether or not people have ever been a member of a union. I think this is going to be a real different distribution, is my sense. All right, and that one is close. So real different distribution. 6% of people who answered have or have ever been a member of a union, and 94% have not been a member of a union. And I wonder then, in turning to our panelists, I think I'll start, and I circulated some questions to them as well. Can I ask you guys how you got started in organizing? What brought you to the work of organizing? And I think I'll turn first to, I'll just go in order of the introductions that we did to get to all of you for this one. But Laura MacIntyre, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into organizing? What led you to that work?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Well, currently I'm a full-time organizer for the Restaurant Opportunities Center. We have a national chapter, a national branch, and then we have a Michigan and specifically a Flint, Michigan chapter. I think I've just always been an organizer, just inherently, naturally. You know, we're coming from Flint, Michigan, which is the home of the sit-down strikers. Of course, you know, Michigan being the bastion of unionization, it's in our blood. And I started working for the Michigan Citizens Lobby as a teenager, and it just kept going from there. You know, I do want to point out though that we just recently did a survey where 40% of workers without a union would vote for one in their workplace. And that's a 50% increase since the last survey was taken 22 years ago. So there's obviously been a lot of union bashing and anti-union sentiment. We're fighting some super PACs with that, but polls and the research does show that people do want to act collectively and be in unions and worker center organizations.
That's really fascinating to hear. Just a quick follow-up on that. You said that was an increase of what over what period of time? That now 40% of people said they would vote for a union. And what was the
48%?
Oh, sorry. Okay. And
Yep.
what was it previously? Like the last
So
time?
the last time it was polled was 22 years ago, and it's been a 50% increase since that time. So as we know, in the 80s with Reaganization and you know, the austerity policies, there was a concerted effort to break the unions with the air traffic controllers strike, which was just, you know, a tragedy. It was a horrible blow to the unions. And I never thought I'd see the day when Michigan would become a right to work state and where it would be illegal to picket. And, you know, as you said, the Lecturers Employee Organization has certainly had its share of you know, work to do in this state. So I'm glad you did mention Leo. AFT local 6244. Yes.
Fabulous. Let me turn to some of the other panelists and just hear how other people have come to the work of organizing. Laura, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started working as a community organizer?
Yeah, so I think, as Laura said, I think it's always just been in my blood. It's always been something that I've been drawn to. I come from a family that's always been very politically activated, very motivated and focused. So growing up, I participated and volunteered with many different organizations in Puerto Rico, fighting against, you know, the high homicide rate that was happening on the island while I was growing up. Bringing awareness to that, bringing awareness to organ donation. And it continued throughout college. And then particularly when Hurricane Maria affected Puerto Rico, myself and other Puerto Ricans on campus at Cornell were really affected and needed to do something, because I've always called like organizing like a light in the middle of a storm. And we just needed to be able to come together to do something to help the people we loved on the island. So I just continued. It just you sort of just continue doing it, and then you realize you can work in this space and help others organize themselves. And I just continued doing that. And then particularly during the pandemic, I saw that migrant women, immigrants were being left out of a lot of the aid, especially food workers and food supply chain workers. So I needed to do more, and that's how I ended up at my last position with Justice for Migrant Women. I wanted to help with the health and safety, making sure that people had access to the things that they needed.
I love that. I love that idea of being a light in a storm. And indeed, if you can be a light in a storm, who would want to turn out, right? Like who would want to go dark?
Exactly. So that's it's just, especially with the climate in the United States and across the world, making sure that like I'm being as active and engaging in a community, it keeps you grounded, and it keeps the faith going in anything that you do.
I love that list of examples too of all the different kinds of campaigns one can be involved in as an organizer. That's really helpful too. Thank you. Celize, Christy, would you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in doing organizing work and advocating for Midwest farmers? Which, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm
Okay,
trying
there you are.
to show my video. But I can start sharing if possible. But yeah, I feel like I came into organizing personally as a student at Iowa State. I feel like personally I didn't know what organizing was until, oh, there we go. Start video. Can you see me?
Now we can see you. That's great.
Okay. I feel like, yeah, as a student at Iowa State, I feel like the things that I was taking action on, I didn't know it was technically organizing until later on, but coming from Texas to a predominantly white institution and studying agriculture, there weren't many folks in my classes who looked like me or came from an urban background. So trying to connect to my studies and like think about the passion I was bringing and being a representation of all the things that I carry and the identities I carry. I started to advocate, about representation, inclusion, and kind of some of the things that I was seeing on campus and how students were being treated. And I feel like around the height of like 2015, 2016, and the election around 2016, particularly on campus, as students of color, and Iowa being a very like highly politically, involved state, and us students of color not feeling comfortable with certain politicians being, taking place, or certain hearings or organizings happening on campus, just because of safety. And then unfortunately people getting attacked, not severely physically, but, in terms of protesting and being able to vocalize on campus, I began to start getting organized with students and local organizations around these issues. And then as a person who is involved in like food and food systems, thinking about what representation looks like, who has space and agency, and who doesn't, and who's taking up that space and who's allowed to be in these spaces. One began asking those questions, particularly like in academia as an undergraduate student. And then as a graduate student, I became involved at my graduate student institution when graduate students were trying to organize, particularly around unionizing as graduate student workers who have, assistantships or fellowships, but what that looks like. And yeah, I feel like at that time, particularly as a student, I began to see like, wow, like all these things that we're advocating for is really organizing, and what that a movement, like taking part in a movement, looks like. Which then led me to, advocate for other things in my professional career, and then now at Kiel, which is really great to kind of blend and mend all of those things together around some of the issues that we work on together collectively.
I love that you brought up student organizing, because I think that it is so often a path that, and historically too, there's been so much energy and just attention and just movements that have come out of student, in particular, attention to issues of representation on their campuses.
Yes, so important.
It's really great. And last but not least, Hannah, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the union work that you've been doing, and becoming the face of this campaign in Michigan?
Hi, yes. So mine was kind of sudden. It was definitely timely how I ended up getting into unionizing. I started at my Starbucks in 2019, so just about a year before the pandemic started. And I was very much in love with my job. I loved my coworkers. I loved what I was doing. And, after going through the pandemic and, seeing the company's response and just the overall public's response, we definitely had some grievances and we had some things that we wanted addressed. And in particular, safety, and especially with our location in our downtown Ann Arbor store, we had a lot of concerns. And anytime we would talk with upper management or trying to get any of these concerns handled, nothing really happened and we weren't taken very seriously. And at one point in probably about December of 2021, maybe January of 2022, me and another coworker, we were spoken with by another employee down the road at a Starbucks who they were about to start their union campaign, and they were, interested to see if other places were thinking about it, had heard about it. There was a big campaign in Buffalo at that point, and they wanted to see if other people would want to join and start a Michigan campaign. And at the time, me and my coworker weren't very sure. And I want to say maybe 10 minutes after he left, my coworker and I looked at each other and we're like, yeah, it's time to go. So it really just took somebody to step up and possibly be willing to risk certain things, one of them being your job. And I was more than happy to put myself out there on the line. I grew up with lots of union members, family members around me. So I knew it was really important and how impactful a union can be for stores and even just a Starbucks job, which is what I hear a lot. But it has made a really big impact, and clearly the company wasn't a huge fan of it. And so I've realized how important it was that we did it at the time that we did, and seeing how many stores, which I believe we're almost at 300, maybe a little over 300 stores not worldwide, nationwide for unionization. So clearly it's made quite an impact, and I'm happy we've been able to spread a little bit throughout the US.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. And well, it's amazing too that you mentioned too that's like you had some apprehensions, when you met with the organizers and heard about the campaigns in Buffalo, and then it's kind of like the worst possible fears came true for you.
Yes. um, that was a worry that we had, as something that I have said multiple times and I will always say is true. They really did pick the worst one to fire, because I have such determination to show them that they are wrong. And it's very clearly what they did was illegal, and multiple judges at this point have agreed. So them thinking because they're a multi-billion-dollar company, they can get away with, massive union busting tactics. And I mean, they were very blatantly obvious at the first store in Buffalo, and now they've just kind of weaned it back. But they really did choose the wrong person, at least with our store, because I will not be letting them off the hook for this one. That is for sure.
No, that's clear, and it's been, I think, inspiring to a lot of people to see. I certainly I remember seeing the headlines about your firing being ruled illegal, and it's exciting to see. I mean, it's a terrible thing that have happened, but it's also exciting to see that like justice can be done.
Absolutely.
It's really great. One of the questions I wanted to ask everybody, and let's see, maybe I'll kind of go through in the same cycle just so we revisit everybody again. But I'm wondering, and the students heard a little bit today from the podcast that they listened to about why food system workers are just so often among the worst paid and worst treated, that in, whether it's in slaughterhouses or farm fields or in restaurants, by both bosses and also in sometimes by customers, by the public. A lot of food system jobs just suck. Why do you think that is? We heard a little bit about the history of it in the podcast, but I want to hear from you guys too, and in particular the kinds of workers that you work with. What are the challenges of organizing in the well, that's separate, but why is work so often so hard in the food system? And so I'll turn to Laura.
So, well, just to start, the restaurant industry itself is a direct result of slavery. So it's sub-minimum wage and tipped work comes out of the slave system. And it's just astonishing that it still exists, that we have a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, that is so blatantly sexist and racist and inequitable in 2024. So we have a federal minimum wage, and then we have a sub-minimum wage, and it's codified. It is actually institutionalized in our 16th Amendment. So, the 13th Amendment. And that's just something that we're going to have to acknowledge, recognize, and change, because it's a system that perpetuates inequity and inequality in our society. So let's just start from there. Our nation was founded on genocide and slavery, and we're still grappling with that reality. There's a lot more to say, but I just wanted to lay it all out there, just right from the beginning. And so it's not unrelated that the majority of workers in the restaurant industry are women, are BIPOC, are undocumented, are migrants, are returning citizens. It's designed to keep us in a subservient working class, and the sub-minimum wage makes you depend on service of like ingratiating yourself to so-called customers, which opens itself up for abuse. And we have one of the highest rates of sexual harassment in any industry. It's disproportionate. The labor practices, there's more sexual harassment for women, usually single mothers. We don't have protections. We don't have health care. And we don't have paid sick leave. So that is one of the reasons why we are fighting so hard. And Rock United has been around for 22 years. It's the oldest restaurant organization for workers, and we have been really pushing for a restaurant workers' Bill of Rights, in addition to eliminating the sub-minimum wage for a living wage plus tips. So I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but those are some really, really important points that we just need to start off with.
Well, and I think there might be a poll question about the tipped wage as well that we could bring up in a second here. I mean, I'll go through all the panelists, and then we'll bring up, I've got 2 poll questions. But I wanted to ask about that tipped wage. There's been some controversy, I think, over getting rid of tipping, but is Rock United's campaign just bring everybody up to the same living wage, or what is the Rock United position on kind of tipping and the tipped wage?
Well, the Rock United position is, we're member driven, and, we organize our members. So what people want, what workers want, is to have a fair and equitable wage, a living wage. So not just a federal minimum wage, but a living, sustainable wage. I remember when I worked for the SEIU for the Fight for 15, but that was a decade ago. We were fighting for $15 an hour for 2015, and the goal was to be $20 an hour for 2020. Well, we're still at $7.25 for a federal minimum wage, and for 213, sub-minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. And like I said, that comes directly out of our legacy of slavery. So it's unconscionable to have that system.
Thank you. That's excellent. Yeah. Laura, did you want to say a little bit about the particular the reasons why conditions are so bad, and maybe particularly in reference to farm workers, which I think people kind of have a sense of, but you can tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. While working at Justice for Migrant Women, we primarily worked with a lot of farm workers because Ohio, especially Northwest Ohio, where Justice for Migrant Women is based, is heavily farm working area. And I think the reality is that a lot of farm workers in this country are undocumented workers. A lot of them are migrants, and they are heavily exploited because of their status and their nationalities, their race, things like that. For example, a lot of the women that we worked with face a lot of sexual violence in the farms and in the fields because of the isolation that they experience, because of the power dynamics in the field. A lot of the times, the crew boss will hold their passports or their documents, and they aren't allowed to leave. So because of that, and because of their isolation, they don't know the rights that they have in the United States, because we all have rights. We all should be able to work without sexual violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. But because of all that isolation, they aren't able, they don't know, and they're kept like that because of that power dynamic. And just as a quick figure, in the American food supply chain, there are about 2.1 million immigrants. That doesn't even include restaurants. So that large amount of immigrants in the workplace, particularly in the food supply chain, allows us, I think, to just sort of forget where our food comes from. I don't think a lot of the times we humanize the people that are working and feeding us, which is why Justice for Migrant Women started a campaign called The Humans Who Feed Us. It built off of the phrase, the hands that feed us, which just chooses humans as the workforce that they're able to deliver. So what we wanted to accomplish with that campaign is to show the joyful stories of immigrants who are coming to this country and feeding us, and why they're doing it, and why they take pride in the work that they do.
I really love that, the idea of thinking about the whole human and not, I mean, so often we reduce people to hands, right? They are hands, and to think about the whole human that those hands are attached to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the reality across not only food workers, it's the reality across all workers that are what's the word, because I hate using it, it's non-technical work or whatever, that unskilled work. I hate that, because one of the things we do at Justice, we wanted to make sure that we know the working in the field. So they took us out to work in the fields. Those jobs are hard. They take so much skill to be able to pick our food and be able to process and package it. And I think it's just making sure that all of us who are workers are sharing worker solidarity with the people that are feeding us, and making sure that when you're going to the grocery store, you're thinking about where your food comes from, and making sure you're supporting people that are paying people correctly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Celize, would you say a little bit about particular challenges in the food system? And HEAL, I know, works broadly kind of across many aspects of the food system. So you might be able to put pieces together for us in ways other people don't get to.
Yeah, and I feel like Laura and Laura both kind of already, mentioned a few things that that I completely agree with and support, and want to elevate as well, in terms of our economy and overall system is definitely dependent on exploitative cheap labor, historically, historically, and continues to perpetuate till today. And I think the beautiful thing at HEAL is that we do work, broadly across the nation, and then collectively bring people together across all the sectors that we think, are involved, or we know that are involved in food and farming systems, with, health, environment, labor, and agriculture. And just kind of, as Laura was sharing too, is thinking, and Laura, but just connects to what Laura was sharing about, thinking about food, and like particularly consumers and groceries, but and this aspect of like, why do we think that this happens? Everything that everyone also shared, and then in addition to that, is that also I feel like there's an overall lack of understanding of the value of food, and the price of like what you purchase on the shelf versus what it is to the cost that it costs to produce the food. And I feel like, we're in this system where commodities are, championed, they're protected, they're emphasized, and all the things to be cheap. So that's why we have this dependent, labor source, because America's like feeding the world and we have to feed the world. And we're challenging this aspect of food access when food isn't accessible, but we have so much abundance. And in actuality, food isn't just that we are lacking in production, it's the accessibility of that food and what food people actually want to have access to. And when I think about, and when we coordinate or advocate or organize with farmers, down to the farmer and producer level, I think there's like USDA data, I think from 2021, that really shares that, farmers received a record low, like about 14 cents, almost 15 cents for every dollar that they spent on food. So the prices that we see in the grocery store, when we think about what that goes back down to what the farmer actually receives, it's almost little to nothing to what actually a grocer or these huge kind of corporations or commodity organizations actually receive. And so when we think about the value of food and actually what goes into it, and when we look at like regional or locally produced food, like for example, at a farmer's market or a co-op, even for folks in my family, they're like, oh, well, that's really expensive. I'd rather like purchase food from this place where it's cheaper. But it's like, do we actually know like why it's cheaper? Do we know who's being exploited or taken advantage of, or the folks that are expendable to make the price that way? When actually the value of food, when we look at it, or we're able to look at it, or actually know about it, then we're able to see like, wow, the value of me being able to connect directly to a producer or directly closer in the longevity of the supply chain. I'm able to see, wow, not only the true cost of food, but actually the value that goes behind it. And I could go on and on and on about that. But I feel like, not only as consumers, but also the way that the system is created, we really don't value the lack of food or the value, food that we actually produce and we purchase. And many, folks in terms on the consumer side, sometimes not only don't think about where their food comes from, but in the ways that it moves from, farm to fork.
That's really fascinating. The podcast that the students listened to today too made the point that Heal was founded in some ways at a moment of real burgeoning interest in food, right? People are paying attention to the local and the organic, but labor really didn't fit into that mix very often. People were trying to buy better food, but very rarely on the grounds that it would be better for the workers who produced it, right? It was better for their bodies or something like that instead.
Yes, absolutely. And when we think about, food and farming, and particularly like around policies and the way that, for example, like the USDA is structured and the Farm Bill is structured, like labor isn't included in many of those pieces of legislation, not even in the USDA. When we think about rights for farm workers or meatpacking workers, that's all under like OSHA and like a different department. And currently right now, one of the things that we're really advocating for is an inclusion of a labor title within the Farm Bill, because it's not included. And so how can we include it if it's not there? And how can we make sure that connection is happening on an agriculture food policy level in this way? And as at its inception, that's kind of, where and how Heal was born, was to bring all individuals or all organizations that speak to different aspects of the food chain can really come together, because many of those people aren't really talking to each other. They're kind of organizing and working in their places and spaces, which is great, and that has power. But when we're being able to come together as a collective, we're able to just truly bring like a total transformation to the space, which is really beautiful in some of the work that we're doing.
I didn't hear about that, about adding labor to the Farm Bill. That's fascinating as a way to put labor in different parts of the conversation. That's really cool. Hannah, do you want to say a little bit about the particular challenges for either workers at Starbucks in particularly, or just kind of food system workers in general? What are the challenges? Why do food system workers need unions?
Yeah, so kind of to touch on what Laura had said, I I think especially with food service workers, in particular Starbucks, and also like when I was growing up, I worked at McDonald's for about 3 years. So that's another big one, that a lot of the labor is referred to as unskilled, even though in reality it is much tougher than what it appears from the outside. Um, I've worked several jobs, a couple of them obviously being food service, but I can very safely say I have not incurred more abuse anywhere from customers than I have at a food service job. And I think there's like an idea that food service workers are like kind of like NPCs. Like we're just not real people. We're just there to help you and help you go on your way. Especially in the environment that we were at in Ann Arbor, there was a lot of uh, entitlement, I guess, just with the people in the area. I mean, we're surrounded by multi-million-dollar houses, and we're all driving cars that barely run. So, they didn't really see us as people most of the time. And especially like when we had asked very little things like during the pandemic, like, hey, can you just wear a mask when coming in to protect ourselves, our families, because most of us had no idea what was going on still. That was seen as the most monumental task for some people and found it just so okay to abuse us, even though at the end of the day, we're all people. So it really shouldn't be that big of an ask. But it, I think most people just see us as disposable, I guess, too. Like a robot could do our job. So why should we respect or pay you? When, this is a conversation we had several times when talking about unionizing and what we would want and what that means for us as a store. One of the biggest things was obviously pay. Ann Arbor, in terms of where it is in the United States, has some of the worst cost of living to how much people make per capita, I think is what I saw. And it's an insane margin. And really all we were asking is just enough so we could possibly live in the city that we work and not 30, 40 an hour plus out just to get into work. And that was viewed as a horrible thing to ask for. And even just in unionizing, one of the biggest things I've been said is, well, it's just a coffee job. Just go somewhere else. When that's not the point. Like we should not have to beg just to be able to work where we live or just to scrape by. Even we shouldn't have to work 2-3 jobs. And most of these kids are also college kids. You shouldn't have to scrape by when working that much and just doing the bare minimum. So I feel like just because of where we were at in the job itself, people just didn't see us as people. And even just in the act of unionizing, it offended people because it would affect them and the price of their coffee and the price of their McDonald's, or it's whatever would affect them, but not the fact that we as people were just asking for a little bit more that the companies can definitely give. And I can't speak for other fast food places, but I can almost guarantee it's going to be a pretty similar situation.
I love that you're calling attention to one of the things that that unions do, which is that you are the people who are working there who can say like, look, we're the ones trying to make ends meet here, and then things that the company cannot know about what it takes to do these jobs and to try to make ends meet on the pay that you're getting. Just seems so important to like consult the people who are actually working in those conditions.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the big things we were asking, is just like even just looking at our pay, like just looking around at the cost of living and just evaluating, okay, this is what you should be paid based on the area that you work in. Just something as small as that, just paying attention, because not every store is the same. My store can be so different from a store in downtown Detroit or Flint or Grand Rapids. It can be so different from any of these places, but we're all paid the same, which doesn't seem to make sense. And even especially on the basis of how long people were working there. I had a coworker who was with the company for 15 years. I mean, he had seen every in and out of Starbucks, and he made 15 cents more than I did, which, not to say my work was bad. It was good, but he definitely should not have made that little for such long service with the company. So even just asking something as small as that seemed to be monumental. So that was definitely one of the big reasons that we wanted to get a union in at our store and just in Ann Arbor in general.
Really fascinating. I think before I go further, I'm going to go ahead and do our last two poll questions. So I'm going to do a quick poll question break, and then I'll come back around to our panel. Let's see. I'm sharing my screen, this one. And both of these relate to some of the things that the panelists have already said to you. So we've got a question here about when the first Starbucks union formed and where. So we'll see if you guys were paying attention, maybe 15, 20 minutes ago. Let's see, I can start. Oh, and let me, you should see the picture big now, and I'll start the poll. And let's see if you guys remember where the first Starbucks union formed and when. I guess I can read the answer choices too. And you can feel free, if you're not a student in the class and you're joining us in the community and you want to try and answer this question in the chat, that'll sort of be the phone a friend hint section, perhaps, for our students. Was it Buffalo, 2021, Chicago in 2009, Memphis in 2012, Seattle in 1985, or Portland in 2020? 3, 2, 1, let's see. At least 56% of you got the correct answer. I think we have it on the slide here. Hannah, did you want to say more about this? I mean, I know you told us a little bit about Buffalo, but do you want to say more about, and then, but what is happening in Seattle in 1985?
Yeah, so technically, yes, it was both A and D. So there was a original union movement in Seattle in 1985. This wasn't done by store workers. This was done by it was roastery warehouse workers, basically roastery plant and the warehouse. They had decided to form a union because one of the biggest things that they were asking for was health insurance, better paid time off, more vacation time. This was stuff that was not provided by the company. It did end up extending to some of the actual coffee shops, but at that point, Starbucks was more of like an actual like they gave out beans, not actual coffee. So it's a little bit different back then. And it did end up, the union did end up disintegrating, I believe, in 1989. So it was for different reasons. But at that point, the CEO at the time was kind of boasting that they gave out these perks, even though that was something that the union had won for the employees. It wasn't something that was willingly given, because they were one of the only places that provided healthcare at the time to a quote unquote fast food worker. So, and then in 2021, that was obviously the more recent one. One of the stores in Buffalo, New York decided they want to start a union movement. They had a really, really big pushback from the company with all of their anti-union tactics. They had come in and they were observing. They were doing captive audience meetings, which basically means they had everybody sit down and just talk about how unions are bad for like an hour and a half and force them to sit. And they did end up winning their union, and that was pretty much the kickoff for really most of the stores in the United States to start their union effort because they saw how successful they were. Ironically, some of the things that we've been asking for in our negotiations, Starbucks has been giving out to stores that are not unionized. And if you have unionized, they will not give you that perk. An example being one of the big things we've been asking for is people can tip on your credit cards or debit cards. That was not something that we could do before because Starbucks said it looked bad to ask for that. But customers had been asking for years. Baristas had been asking for years. That was something that we've been asking for in negotiations. And conveniently, our non-union stores, that is an ability they have, but they will not let us do that for our union stores. So, and the list goes on and on.
Oh, that's remarkable. So you know it's possible, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's fabulous. What a great question. Okay, and then this last question, I'm pretty sure is no right answer. So we'll do one last poll question. And it's, should we continue to tip food servers? So let me see if I can start this. You should have gotten a picture of this image if you're using iClicker. And your options are, shoot, I can't move the window off the screen. There's a couple of Yes, with additional ones. Let's see, can I move this? Oh yeah, there we go. Keep the tipping culture as it is. B, yes, but also eliminate the sub-minimum wage and raise it to minimum wage plus tips. No, I don't mind occasionally rewarding someone for good service, but it shouldn't be expected or required. No, tipping culture is getting out of hand. And E, I'm unsure. What is your take? And we have obviously, you know, what Rock United would like, but where are you at? The results of this, we have a lot of people, so the plurality, 58% have answered B. They would like to eliminate the sub-minimum wage and raise it to minimum wage plus tips. Laura, did you want to say any more about that or thoughts on the kind of the options here?
Yes, like I said, we're worker and member driven. And so that seems to be what the majority of our members, and we have, I'm trying to like look at my notes. We have over 65,000 worker members and allyships want to raise it to the minimum wage plus tips, only because that's part of the system, because that's part of the structure. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who think the answer is, you know, D or E or F, eliminate capitalism and dismantle, you know, that unequal aspect of our economy and the structure. But given the conditions under which we have to work with policy and legislation, you know, we're pushing for minimum wage plus tips. But as we've discussed already, it's woefully inadequate. I mean, because this is a movement that has been going on for over 2 decades, and we've been asking for a wage that a living wage, and the living wage keeps going up, especially with inflation these days. I mean, I don't even know what the most recent calculation was, but the last time I looked, it was at $23 to $26 per hour, especially in places like the Bay Area, New York City, Philadelphia, which is where a lot of restaurant workers are. And you know, it's unfortunate that we have what we call the other NRA, not the National Rifle Association, but the National Restaurant Association, which is a super PAC, which claims to be the voice of workers, but actually isn't. It's dark money that's actually working against workers' interests and against unionization. That claims that, you know, we need to keep the tip structure. But again, it's predicated on slavery, and that's what it comes out of. And I just want to keep driving this fact home, that we didn't have tipping. It came out of feudalism. It wasn't part of the American culture, and it was considered undemocratic. And then after emancipation, when newly freed slaves, couldn't get paid work, they actually had to work for tips. So this is where our tipping system it's morphed into that. And unfortunately, you know, it has been reinforced over the years, because predominantly BIPOC, women of color, undocumented migrants, you know, are the ones that work in this industry. And there's been a feminization of poverty, and you know, we know this history. Although we are getting a couple of questions, and I did have questions for you about how you would like those to be answered, because we have questions and answers, and then the chat, because I do have resources and links, and Rock United actually does policy papers, and so on our website we do have links to a lot of this research that we do, as well as I want to encourage everyone, if they haven't already, to read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and you know, anything that's been written by Angela Davis about the abolitionist movement, because that, you know, is linked to the food system, and to you know, the tipping culture that we have that's predicated on slavery. And the 13th documentary by Ava DuVernay. So those are just basics.
Hey, that's really helpful. Michelle Alexander was actually just at U of M speaking at the
Yes.
MLK Junior Day Symposium.
Yes.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw one more question out to the entire panel, and then we'll turn to audience questions. And one of them was indeed about resources. And if any of the panelists want to drop things into the chat for everybody to see, we can send messages. So I want to invite any of the panelists, if you have reading recommendations for people who are interested, particularly if you see anything come by in the chat and you were like, oh, I've got something great for that, please, any of you can go ahead and drop resources in the chat. And anyhow, I'll do one more round for the panel, and then I want to turn to some of your questions. Go ahead and feel free to put questions in the Q&A. Is sometimes easier for us to see them, just because the chat can go by pretty quickly. But either way, we'll get to your questions in just a second. But the one question I want to let everybody on the panel speak to a little bit is, well, I guess you pick one of two. One is whether or not you there's any particular campaigns that you're excited about, just with the kind of breadth of organizing and unionization efforts that have been going on across the country. There were the big ones, of course, last year, the United Auto Workers and the SAG-AFTRA strikes that made headlines. But in food, or any campaigns that you think are kind of maybe hopeful things, and or if there are things that consumers can do to help food systems workers who are trying to unionize, or to help be supportive of food system workers in general. If there's either of those that and I'll let's see, I'm going to go through the panel one more time, and then I'm sure we've got questions from the audience to turn to you. But Laura, do you have either campaigns you're excited about, or things you want to tell consumers and students in the class and anybody watching that they could do to support unionization efforts in food system workers?
Yes. I mean, there's just so much. There's so much, but let me just stick to one thing. We are supporting the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights, and it is a national legislative push to unite not just restaurant workers, but service workers, food systems workers, because we recognize that it's not, we're called the Restaurant Opportunities Center, but it's not. Our economy has changed, and the nature of work has changed so much. We've got gig economy workers, we've got independent contractors, baristas who may not be necessarily tipped workers, but they're still have some of the same predicaments. So the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights, and we are proud to say that Rashida Tlaib actually reintroduced it with several sponsors throughout the country. So she's actually helping us spearhead the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights. And that's, I don't want to say that that's the end all answer to everything, but that's at least something concrete that we can do now, especially with the partisanship, in our legislature. But I think what we always need to do is to remember not to be, individuals and just work for a solitary, work for ourselves. Collective action works. Collectively, we can make changes and make a difference. And it just seems like it's overwhelming at times. I mean, like I said, I might be one of the oldest panelists. I've been doing this for many, many, many decades, and it is a struggle. It is a struggle, and it is not glamorous, and it's hard work. And I'm so excited to see so many younger panelists. And the Starbucks movement just gives me new lifeblood, gives me new hope, and I want to do anything I can to to join that movement and to offer any solidarity. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm going to put my personal contact in, because I do have information, resources. We offer trainings. We do know your rights. We do a lot of things as a worker-led center and organization.
Thank you. Laura, any particular campaigns you're excited about, or things that you want to tell consumers and others to do to help food system workers?
Yeah, I mean, as last year was such an inspiring year in the worker movement with all of the different movements. I'll put it in the track. Cornell has this awesome useful tool that helps you see what strikes are happening, because most of the times we're seeing the big ones, SAG-AFTRA, WGA, UAW, but there are a lot of strikes happening out there. In particular, like hotel workers are striking, things like that. So I'll put that in the chat. And Starbucks United is always my bread and butter. I love seeing updates of winning. They had very big fights in my college town, so that's always very close to my heart. But I think to support farm workers and other undocumented people in the food supply chain, I think the most important thing is to encourage your federal representatives to pass the Citizenships for Essential Workers Act. It will cover most of undocumented people in the food supply chain since they are considered essential workers. And then just continuing to support campaigns that make people visible. A lot of the times, unfortunately, farm workers are not allowed to unionize because under the Fair Labor Standards Act, they do not have the power of collective bargaining. In states like California, New York, they've had the opportunity to do that, but those are still very hard fights. Even if they win, they get shut down. So making sure you're tuning into those fights is very important. And just making sure that you are, as Laura said, making sure you're staying connected and in community, because the fights are ongoing and we should all be, capitalism works by keeping us apart, so we should always be together.
Thank you so much. Celize, I see that you dropped a couple of resources in the chat, which I want to just call people's attention to. So check out the chat because there's a couple there, but do you want to elaborate or say more?
Yes, I mean, I was just snapping away to what Laura shared because, yeah, that's part of the system trying to pull us apart instead of collectively coming together to build power. And yeah, I did drop some resources in the chat. They're particularly around some of the policy work that HEAL is doing and advocating around, specifically on labor in the food system and how we're trying to advocate for a labor title in the Farm Bill, as well as a couple of other marker bills. Some of those marker bills particularly talk about protecting like America's Meatpacking Workers Act, which we've worked collaboratively with like Food Chain Workers Alliance, Senator Cory Booker's office, and it's been introduced to Congress. And then there's another act called the Fairness for Farm Workers Act that protects, actually mandates overtime pay for farm workers. And another one that we're really trying to advocate for is supporting our Farm and Food System Workforce Act, which is advocating to create a USD office that's dedicated to addressing worker issues, because that does not exist. So just so folks are familiar about what some of what Farm Bill is, how we're making advocacy efforts in that, and then some of these other marker bills that we're working with legislators on in different areas of the food and farm systems work. And I think another kind of to answer your question about like how can folks get involved, not only consumers, but folks who are listening, whether they're students, whether they're consumers, whether they're academics, whether maybe you're all of them all at once. But my passion and heart always looks to like where you are locally, like things are happening locally where you are and how you can get connected. And I mean, I'm not in Michigan, but I'm familiar with folks in Michigan, and I'd love to call attention to, for example, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network that Malik Yakini has been championing for years. And I'm sure many of you already know, like Detroit is just a very just like battleground when it comes to food justice and food sovereignty. And I know Malik, I've met Malik in a few spaces and places, but just thinking about how, he's really advocating and has started, their own grocery store and food co-op in the city of Detroit is phenomenal, and they're working on it. So I wanted to call attention to that. And then two, I really wanted to call attention to an amazing organization called MIFS, Michigan Food Farming and Systems. They do such great work and working with farm workers and advocating for farm workers, especially like Black and Indigenous and underserved farmers, as well as women who are trying to get involved in farming. But all of these organizations are also working locally, like in the state of Michigan. So whether, if folks who are there to really get connected to local organizations, local community organizers who are doing things maybe at a city or state-based level, because when we look at things that are national, like sometimes it feels somehow far removed, and like, how do I connect to that where I am locally, and what does that issue look like also locally to where I am? Which is, something that personally I do, and the work that we do at Heal is always grounding, like what are the folks doing on the ground there, and then how can we then collectively connect with them to our larger network to then build collective power together, but that we're always rooted, down to the, folks on the ground who are doing the work locally, perspective to where they are. But really wanting to share with all of you all of these resources, but you are all not far removed from these issues. Whether you're a consumer or you've worked at a restaurant or not worked at a restaurant, you worked on a farm or not worked on a farm, everyone has to eat and everyone participates in the system one way or another. But wherever you are, connect locally and then try to, as you can, get involved in any of the ways that, I know folks will be sharing with their organizations or folks that they know as well. So, and please reach out, like please connect with well, I don't want to speak for anybody, but please connect. Happy to connect with anyone at any time, but thank you.
Baba Malik was one of the past community co-leaders of the course, actually. He's spoken a couple of times. Yeah, he's heavily influential, of course, in the course and everything else. Whereas, oh yeah, Hannah, things that we can do to help the Starbucks Workers United campaigns, or just workers in the food system in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we had noticed when we had started the campaign and when we were in the midst of trying to get our store unionized is a lot of people just had no idea we were even trying to unionize. I think it's one of those things that I think Laura had talked about, just about there's a lot of really, really big campaigns going on, like the UAW and the SAG-AFTRA strikes, which is awesome. But a lot of the times the smaller ones kind of get swept under the rug, even though they are just as big. And just as impactful. So, a lot of the times we would be out striking or we would be out just handing out flyers, talking about what was going on. And I could not tell you how many people were just so confused that even a single store had unionized at that point. And I mean, we were very well over 2 years into the unionization process. So, it had been happening for a while. So, I think one of the biggest things that consumers can do is just try and pay attention to what your not just baristas, but what your people are telling you. If you're going into a coffee shop every day and they're telling you like, yeah, we're really trying to get like a general strike going on, so that way we can tell the company what's going on and tell them we're not okay with our treatment. Try and participate in it if you can, because one of the biggest things that we've learned when fighting these big companies is they don't like to listen to employees, but they do really like to listen to customers. Regardless of what our concerns are, if you go to them as a customer and you tell them these grievances, they will 9 times out of 10 listen to you rather than listen to us. A great example, after I had gotten fired from my job, I had a barista come to me crying over the phone, saying that there was a customer who had vomited in the store. It was everywhere, and they were forced to stay open, even though it was extremely unsafe to be in the store. So I had called corporate, acting as a customer, expressing my dissatisfaction, and they closed the store. So tell me why that would make sense as a barista that you can't air your grievances and be heard, but as a customer, you can. So even not in the union, in the store, you as a person have so much more impact than you think you do. And even just participating in a general strike for a day, or just listening to your baristas, or seeing how you can get involved in helping is so incredibly impactful. And the other thing is, one of the biggest things we had, at least when I was getting my union organized, it is so scary by yourself, and it can be really, really daunting. But the amount of community support I got me through every single day. It was so incredibly inspiring to have so many people around me rooting for me, cheering me on, and it has helped me get through every single day. So just providing just a little bit of support can make somebody's day, week, year, whatever. It can be really, really amazing. So I guess the one thing to take away for it is just listen, pay attention where you can. Because it can really, really impact somebody's or a whole store's life, basically.
such a great, the vomiting example is terrible, but it's also a great example of solidarity, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I told my baristas when I left, I was like, it doesn't matter if I don't work here anymore. Call me, text me, email me, send a carrying pigeon if you need to. If something goes wrong, let me know and I will try and help as best I can. And even from the outside, just something small like that, it completely turned around their day. So yeah, it not the best example to give, unfortunately, but that is the sad reality of being in a downtown store.
I have some questions from audience members. Some of these are I think, going to be easily directed, and then some of them are kind of for everybody. But let me start with one that I think is probably for Laura. How can we support undocumented immigrants, and what legal protections do undocumented immigrants have in the food system? That comes from Elliot.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, encouraging the passing of the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act is incredibly important, and encouraging any type of expansion to our citizenship in this country is like the most important thing, because that allows more access to labor protections. In particular, for farm workers, existing protections exist under we called it MISPA, but it's the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Workers Protection Act. So that's why we gave it a fun acronym. And that just outlines all of the labor guidelines for farm workers. So it's what the farms have to look like, what transportation, labor, things like that, because unfortunately sometimes they'll be like, okay, we're going to give you free housing, but then deduct it from their paycheck, things like that. And then additionally, a lot of our farm working is being given through visas, through the H-2A program. So making sure that that is being supported, making sure that those workers are also not exploited, because the same way as, I mentioned that women are isolated and their documents are taken away from them, that also happens to H-2A workers, and then they're stuck in a country that they can't leave, and they don't know what to do, and they can't, even though they are allowed to leave situations that they are not good for them, they are kept there because they have their documents and their visas. So just making sure you're staying aware. There's obviously an uptick in child labor as well, particularly in the food supply chain. And I'll also drop a wonderful podcast by some colleagues of mine that are lawyers that work with farm workers, that I think it'll be a great resource for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's see. I have a question here for Laura MacIntyre. Do you have any recommendations or advice for servers advocating for more livable wages for themselves? And can you imagine solutions for this that aren't policy based for those who work in chain restaurants? From Claire.
So yes, I mean, obviously it's not a simple answer to that, but we actually have a three-pronged approach. So we do obviously research, policy, advocacy, and legislation, but we also do organization. We do workers, we offer free training, free know your rights seminars, basically anything that our members need or would like to have provided. We're a worker organization, and it's free, and you can sign up, and in fact you can sign up even if you're not a restaurant worker. You can sign up if you've been a restaurant worker, if you eat at restaurants, if you are a restaurant owner, because it's about the food system, right? And it's about, I consider myself as a lecturer at the University of Michigan, a service worker. That's one of the reasons why I support our Leo organization. We are all, if you're not, part of the owning class, you're basically a service worker in this economy. We do direct action. So we do policy, we do legislation, and we do direct action, and we do workforce development. So that's like a broad way of answering that question. But to go to rockunited.org, you can sign up to be a part of ROC, because we have over 65,000 members already, and we need the numbers to, you know, and the input from people so that we can counter this dark money, the PACs, the super PACs that are very well organized, very well funded. And, you know, the only way that we can fight this is to bond together, is to over our common interests and our common goals, and to recognize that we're service workers, that we're the people that are connected to the hands, right? And to our long history of organizing and labor organizing, to build on that and to not get discouraged, and to keep moving forward. So, I mean, there's a lot more concrete things that I do have to share, but you know, with the time constraints. So I am a community organizer, and so I do have a direct phone number and email, and join us, you know, call me, pick up the phone. We can get the work done. And I really would love to collaborate with the Starbucks union, because we can help you organize, and we can help things. There actually is one more thing. In Michigan, we do have the Financial Emergency Manager Act, which we need to get rid of in Michigan, because it's a policy, it's a legislation that allows for the governor to appoint a financial emergency manager over a municipality or a school district. And what is not emphasized is that within that legislation, one of the things they can do is just eliminate union contracts and workers. So, and that's still on the books in Michigan, and it's being used as a template for the rest of the country, so that we do need to abolish that and get rid of that in this state.
Thank you so much for that. I wonder if, let's see. And again, if any of the panelists want to drop resources connected to any of the campaigns they're talking about in the chat, I already see lots of them, and that's really useful. You know, let me go to this question from Nathalie before we run out of time. She says, it seems to me like unions are a great option for workers, but I wonder what concerns or consideration workers would have that might make them hesitate to organize. And obviously we have the example of, like, you could lose your job, but I wonder if any of the panelists want to weigh in that kind of, you know, it's not necessarily downsides, but like, what are the risks that workers face? What are the concerns? Is it just about job loss, or what other things can discourage or stand in the way of organizing? And I guess truly anybody can kind of hop in there. Maybe I should ask somebody specific.
I can try to start. And yeah, so sorry. Hannah, feel free to chime in.
We did it at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many things, and you know, yeah, I feel like there's so many ways to answer that, and it all comes down to, I feel like, you know, the particular individual. But just as you said, Margot, there's so much risk, not only in terms of really either loss or lessening of livelihood, but then I feel like, you know, it's time and capacity and effort. Like, you know, as a worker, you know, you are advocating against your direct or potentially direct source of income or your livelihood. And if you're working like on a farm or meat processing plant, or even at a Starbucks or another restaurant, I can only imagine the amount of time that you're trying to work to make the amount of money that you're trying to make to sustain yourself and your family and your livelihood. So then when you think about additional time to challenge that, it's like, wait, what time? Because I'm physically working, and then now I have to put my body and physicality in another space and place to then advocate for the things that I should already receive. But maybe sometimes there's also this aspect of like feeling like powerless, and feeling like if I do speak up, not only is it of risk, but then maybe like, you know, what is it that I can actually do, and what can I actually change, which is beautiful in terms of the power of unionizing, coming together, building collective power, because it doesn't just take one person, it takes multiple people, and it takes time. And it's not gonna, you know, change doesn't happen overnight. It's this consistent and persistent efforts that we put in together. And so for some people, that time is a huge risk, not only just the immediateness of loss of income. And yeah, I think just knowing that it's not even for the short haul, but really the long haul, because there's always going to be something, whether that's the most immediate issue or, the most perpetuating systemic issue that's, even further down. But yeah, I'm sure I'll tag team on Hannah for her to share too. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, really well spoken. I was gonna say that is a lot of what I was gonna say also. I think one of the biggest things is definitely time and effort and just emotional labor too that it takes to unionize a business, a group of people. It takes a lot, and I think one of the biggest things is definitely there's risk, there is possibility of not even just being fired, but just retaliation in general. I know a lot of people that I've spoken with, they're also just friends with their store manager, or they know them as people, they get along with them, and they don't want to jeopardize that relationship or put them in a hard spot, which is completely understandable. And I mean, this is people's livelihoods, their health insurance, this is everything to them, and that is completely understandable why people would be a little hesitant. And I think one of the biggest things too is you need somebody to be able to step up and take leadership of the group most of the time to get things organized, and not everybody has somebody at their place of employment to do that or is able to take that risk. So I think too, just in itself, having a support group while you're trying to unionize with your coworkers is incredibly useful. So yeah, no, and everything Celize said, absolutely, I completely agree.
Probably also why solidarity is so important and crucial to people as they're in these struggles. We are reaching the end of our time, so I'm just going to go ahead and thank all of our panelists so much for joining us, for sharing their expertise, their experiences, and all of the really wonderful resources too for people to get involved if you want to get involved in all of these different campaigns that are working to try and increase justice and sustainability and true food sovereignty for workers, in some ways sovereignty over their own jobs. All right, we are about at 8 o'clock. Thanks everybody so much, and we'll see you guys next week for, I can share my screen one last time so you can see what's coming up next. Next week we have the history and future of food in Detroit with our own Shakara Tyler is going to moderate a panel. We're really, this is going to be a treat, with Jerry Ann Hebron of Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, Dr. Joe Ciadella, who wrote a book called Motor City Green that I can show you here. He's an American Culture PhD. Oh, it doesn't want to show you the cover. Motor City Green, briefly, from American Culture here at the University of Michigan, and also Gabrielle Knox from the Joy Project in Detroit. So it's going to be a wonderful panel, and I can't wait to see you all then.